Now, a little bit of a background on Lazer. So Lazer, I came to know the team at Lazer through my time at Coinbase because they've done some awesome work for Coinbase, as well as through a close personal friend of mine, Greg Egan at Goldfinch, who has also worked with them. Through those two different channels, they were introduced as like absolute top shelf Web3 Dev Agency, highest NPS possible marks. So I was excited to meet them. It's turned out to be true. They're also just super nice. Probably Canadian roots, although I think they're pretty distributed at this point. I'll let them give the pitch of like what their mission and services are, but that's how I came to know them. And then I'll introduce our two presenters as well. So we have Luca. Luca is a senior PM specializing in Web3 clients and projects. He got red pilled in 2021, mostly through a few DAOs, including one specifically for skiers and snowboarders. Is that one going to buy a mountain? I'm in a golf DAO that bought a golf course.
Yeah, so it was very much Links DAO inspired, with the goal of buying a mountain. Kind of petered out, but
expensive.
That was the direction we're going in. Yeah. Actually, we were looking at some like small mountains northeast that were for sale. We had some people like actually go out and check out the properties, but another story.
Yeah, fun stuff. Next bull market. Let's see. And he also has an extensive product management experience in Web 2. He's worked for major clients like Google, Coinbase, Bored Ape Yacht Club, and Gucci. Also, fun fact that I don't even think he knows, we overlapped at Capital One briefly back in 2018. So Luca, thanks a lot for making the time today. And Azim. Azim is a software engineer at Lazer Technologies. He's worked on a bunch of projects over his time at Lazer, ranging from mobile apps, web apps, backend, Web3 solutions, and now AI solutions. So these guys have some awesome content to walk through. We've spent some time working on it together, and it's like core learning for aspiring builders out there. They know the modern Web3 stack front to back because they're looping through it on a daily basis. So who better to talk to about it? Also, we want to have Q&A. The best way to run Q&A in a forum like this is to have folks post questions in the chat, and then I will go ahead and decide like when the right time to jump in is and what questions to ask and kind of like aggregate and combine questions just to keep things orderly. So please do post questions in the chat and I will manage that. So without further ado, I'm super excited to present the Lazer team. Which of you should be made, well, actually, is one of you already presenter? Can you share screen? Or which of you should I make screen?
Yeah, we're gonna trade off. Let me see. I can check if I have firms to share.
There we go.
Okay, awesome. Cool. And just for context before we jump in, can't see any of your beautiful faces, unfortunately, but if you have questions, drop them in the chat. And Stephen, feel free to interrupt because we're generally pretty laid back, informal workplace, like internally. So the more conversational, the better, I think, for all of us.
Will do.
Cool. Yeah, I'll kick things off just like very, very high level overview. And then I just want to share a couple of examples of different types of projects that we've worked on so you can get a sense of where our expertise lies in different directions and just kind of different technologies that we've worked with. And then I'll pass it off to Azim to go more in depth on technologies. He's the developer working with these day to day. And I was a SWE in a past life, but definitely not my strongest skill set. So at a very high level, when we're building out a lot of our like dApps and products that we're working on with clients, these are kind of like the 5 main pieces of infrastructure that we think about. Some are a little bit more like default decisions. Some we have to think about really closely depending on what the clients are that we're working with. And while we'll circle back and Azim will dive into these more deeply, I did just want to briefly share this before we jump into some examples of past projects that we did. And we'll kind of talk through what were decisions around some of these technologies that we implemented on these 3 different examples that I'll walk through. So the first example project I want to share, and Stephen, I'm sure you'll be excited to see this one, was with Coinbase's On-Chain Summer, which was a month-long promotion that they did when they launched their base L2 blockchain in mostly August of this year. So this one was relatively recent. And they basically partnered with over 50 companies, creators, and projects to just like make a splash with their base launch. And the results of that were awesome. We had over 700,000 NFT mints throughout all of this. And they successfully made a splash in a particularly downtrodden part of the market. As far as looking into the technical considerations of this one, so given that we were working with Coinbase, a lot of it was kind of decided from their perspective, since obviously they're an experienced like Web3 client, they know what they want. But some of the things that we integrated were, so obviously building off of their blockchain, like Base is a new L2, but it's based upon a lot of like fundamental Ethereum and optimistic rollups that made it familiar for our devs to work on. So that was relatively straightforward. For the nodes, like that was something that they took care of. We didn't have to worry about either hosting on like Alchemy, which is what we'll usually do, or something like standalone. As for wallets, this is pretty standard, like generally available to Web3 wallets, like your MetaMask, your Rainbow Kits, etc. But since it was a Coinbase product and they're really trying to push their wallet product now, that was something where we integrated some features that were only really accessible and available to Coinbase wallet users. And then finally, for the smart contracts here, so to be honest, unless we're getting super technical with the work that we're doing, we use a decent amount of off-the-shelf smart contracts. Reason being is because that really plays a lot better in terms of just like security and making sure that there aren't any like loopholes or exploits in these contracts. And especially when working with these bigger clients where like their privacy, their security is of the utmost importance. We really don't feel the need to reinvent the wheel. And a lot of these contracts, we can make small changes and extend them as we see fit. So this was a fun one. This
Two quick
was like,
questions here. Well, I've got
yeah,
you. So
sure.
Node, you were using Coinbase Cloud as a node provider, presumably, or was that not even an integration you had to drive?
I'm honestly not sure. I think that was something I would imagine it was Coinbase Cloud through their end.
Cool. And then on those like smart contract repositories, you've got ThirdWeb and Zora. Like I think as you go through cases, it would be good just to build like a maybe not an exhaustive, but like a Pareto like 80-20 list of like great places to pull high quality like smart contract templates from and like
Yep.
like what they specialize on.
Totally. Yeah. So that's a great question. At a high level, like I'd say the go-tos that like we look at in the industry are Third Web and Open Zeppelin. Like those are super common. Main reason we lean towards Third Web is because we have a close partnership with them and just the nature of our business. And honestly, a lot of Web3, as Azim will talk through, it's putting together different pieces in each of these different categories. And so when you're working with this at scale with multiple projects, we have our own relationships with different providers. Like ThirdWeb is a big one that we love to work with, both on the smart contract side and with a lot of their e-commerce tools that they've been adding. So we do a decent amount of e-commerce integrations for Web3 as well. And even when we're working with these bigger enterprises, like they will have pre-existing agreements with some of these providers that they'll want to use. So for example, the split here on ThirdWeb and Zora was some of these specific NFT mints, they had partnerships with the Zora team. So they wanted to make sure that we were implementing those smart contracts in order to kind of pay heedance to that, even though, the contracts themselves weren't meaningfully different since they were fairly run-of-the-mill NFT mints. Cool. Yeah, and we'll get a little bit more into the specifics with contracts as well, because I know we have an architecture diagram a little bit later on that Azim will share. Second example of a project that we were involved in was this startup called Abacus Protocol. They are fortunately no longer around, but they were one of the companies that was doing kind of NFT-based lending and financing, so doing borrowing using users' NFTs as collateral. Essentially, what they did that was interesting was, they allowed NFT holders to borrow against their NFTs, but then the users actually doing the lending, they were able to select different tranches at which they would get paid out in the event of liquidation. So if you're in the lowest tranche where you get paid out first, you're looking at a lower APR, something like a 3 to 4% is what I saw. Whereas if you're up on like a higher tranche, you're looking at 20% plus APR, which cool concept, wish they were still around, but unfortunately they are not. This one was built on Ethereum because this was very much like bull market times. And so situationally, Ethereum made sense for anything NFT financing related since it was seeing a lot of volume and that's where they wanted to build natively. The node on this one, they had set it up. I believe it was on Alchemy, but that was something where honestly, we very rarely run into people who are self-hosting their nodes. wallets. We built infrastructure kind of through like a Web3 auth or something along those lines for connecting any Web3 wallets. And then for the smart contracts, and more interestingly, the monitoring. So in this case, the team actually had in-house Solidity engineers who were building these custom smart contracts. So this was a pretty like intensive DeFi use case. And so we came in to help with everything adjacent and around the smart contracts. And part of that was building out their like monitoring system and the UI for the website so that users could actually see what was going on with these different NFT lending pools. And we did that by building a couple of subgraphs based on the graph protocol. Cool. And then the final one, so this is the one that's kind of in limbo with launch related. So ask we please keep this one within the group here. But this was a case of doing not just something that was a NFT drop, but building an entire like loyalty system around a new product that was being launched. This one was a really interesting project because it was the case we're working with a very large client, but that knew absolutely nothing about Web3. And so that led to some interesting trade-offs and decisions that we kind of had to advise them on and help them figure out throughout the course of working on this project for the majority of this year. So it came down to even like us, advising them on what blockchain they should be using to launch this on. And so one that we like to lean on in cases like this is something like Polygon, where it's widespread. It's used at like a widespread like amount of people in surface area to the extent where it's been proven to an extent, like people trust it and there's enough volume and attention on it. But at the same time, it's something that really prioritizes low fees, low environmental impact. And we feel like Polygon's been doing a good job with that. So big companies like that, they can kind of talk about all those points, especially for a first time Web3 project as they kind of enter into the ecosystem. For the node on this one, we work closely with Third Web. It's one of the projects that we work with them to help make happen. So we integrated as much of their technology as possible. So including their smart contracts. So they have an addition drop contract, that's ERC 1155. That has a lot of kind of customization options to it. And then we even used their gasless relayer, which I'm still not totally sure if it's like publicly available, but that was something cool that we got to have access to before it came out from the start. And the reason we were using the gasless relayer coming back to the wallet use case was this was an example of a client where they wanted this Web3 experience to be as Web2 friendly and as seamless as possible. So we made a lot of decisions and some sacrifices to make sure that that experience would be possible. And so we worked in this case with Magic Wallet, which is a provider of wallet as a service, where essentially users can just create wallets by signing up with an email address or a phone number. Those wallets are managed in the back end by Magic. And then that kind of allows for a more seamless experience from the user perspective. And then something I think that was kind of an interesting discussion to have with the client, and I think I never thought about too much from a Web3 perspective, was how do Web2 clients who don't want to touch Web3, how do they deal with their actual treasury administration of whether it's their Web3 funds they might be getting from royalties, or also down to providing the signatures to deploy the contracts and the NFTs and everything around that. And so we looked at several options for what was a good like treasury or admin wallet solution for them. And those conversations are still pending to an extent. But that's something that I wanted to highlight because there's just not too much information out there. And I would say that's not decisions that I had thought a whole lot when thinking about like consumer Web3 applications.
Yeah, interesting. Does that need to be like almost like a fiduciary, someone who's or like a controller like type third party who makes financial decisions on behalf of the client? Or is it more of like a accounting tool set?
Yeah, it's different layers of offerings, I would say. It's like different companies kind of target different types of institutions and clients. It's like a big one that we can use as an example is Fireblocks. So they really specialize in kind of these like institutional grade admin and treasury wallets for like big banks, financial institutions that want to deal in Web3. And so they kind of on top of that, they have this whole like stack of accounting and financing tools and legal tools to help these institutions stay compliant. Versus you have smaller ones, so like a company like BitGo, for example, which will provide these admin wallets. They'll manage it, kind of provide different security measures to ensure that there's not like a single point of failure and a single person who is signing. So kind of some multi-sig like features, but also kind of having other features that provide a little bit more of like institutional grade robustness, let's say.
Got it.
Yeah. Cool. That is the examples. Now I would like to pass it off to Azim, who will dive deeper into the technical aspects here.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Let me share my screen. All right, you should see the Figma that has the 5 dots. Awesome. All right, great. So what I wanted to do for my section, I wanted to dive deeper into the DAPP anatomy, the decentralized app anatomy. And as Luca mentioned, there's like 5 things we wanted to break it down into that we consider are the pillars to make the DAPP successful. And then we can go into some architecture diagrams that I have ready for you for a DeFi example, for an NFT marketplace example, for a liquidity pool example, any of those. And we'll share this Figma with you later on so you can take it and read it more. Of course, I'm not going to read all of this content to you. There's a lot to cover. So of course, this is like more of a homework. Just go ahead and read it at your own time. And there's tons of resources on the right side as well that are useful links that I'll talk about a little bit in a little bit. Okay, so let's go back to the DAPP. So yeah, when we start the project, we usually just start with the wallet solution. Wallet solution, of course, is a replacement in the Web2 world. We would do authentication for website, like username, email address, anything like that with the password. That will be the authentication. But in the crypto world or Web3 world, we will use wallets. And we always have to make a decision between whether or not to use a custodial wallet or a non-custodial wallet. And of course, the custodial wallet, the main distinguishing feature between the two is the custodial wallet will take your private key, which is the key that we use to sign transactions, to create transactions. That private key will be stored in a centralized system somewhere, and you're holding that for the user. So that means they're custodial to you, whereas non-custodial private keys will be stored either by the user, or in some cases, for example, we have some non-custodial examples. I put some logos for these partners that we work with. Magic Link is one, Web3 Auth is another. Those two, they don't really keep your private key for you, but they also don't. So what I mean by that is they put it somewhere in the middle. They hide your private key on chain in various spots. And this is like a patented solution for Magic Link and Web3 Auth that they have documentation over. And they collect that information when you want to create a transaction using your wallet. And when you want to take your wallet outside of their ecosystem to say, I don't want to be with Magic Link anymore, I want to take my private key and just go do everything myself, make it my non-custodial wallet myself, they can disclose that private key to you. Whereas custodial wallets, you cannot do that too. So we have solutions like Binance, Coinbase, Exodus, Free Wallet, any of these are custodial wallets. That means the private key is handled by them. So they are at risk. If their databases are hacked or anything is hacked, then the private keys can be leaked. So that's on them. They have to insure the assets in there. Whereas on the non-custodial, you don't have to insure any of those assets. Those are held by the user themselves. So those are just some pros and cons that I wanted to share with you. Of course, the non-KYC piece is very good too, is that for custodial wallets, you have to do KYC. You have to find out who the user is because you have to be compliant with all the auditing parties that you're answering to. Whereas for the non-custodial, you don't have to do that because private key is held by the user, not by you. So that's the first decision we have to make in a DAPP. And usually we end up going with the Magic Link or Web3 Auth. Anything like that is pretty safe. Of course, Coinbase wallet is coming up next as well. Any questions on that so far?
Yeah, I would just maybe also from the perspective of like, hey, who you're designing for, like what do you choose, right? Like for a Web3 game that like wants to start off with minnows, but also cater to whales, and maybe you have case studies, so like just delay the question, but like sort of like what are some of the design decisions and trade-offs between even amongst the non-custodial solutions?
That's a good question. Yeah, we do have some examples on this as well, but for a custodial, you'll see a very common pattern is the centralized exchange, like Binance, for example, Coinbase. They will use custodial because they want to hold the assets, and they have to do KYC as well. So that's a good example for where you would use custodial, whereas for non-custodial, you would want to keep everything decentralized. So DeFi apps or any game that is decentralized as well, any NFT collections, NFT marketplaces where you want to trade NFTs between different marketplaces, like OpenSea could be one, or Rarible, those different marketplaces that you want to connect to. So you would keep things non-custodial, whereas for custodial, you will keep everything centralized within your system, within your ecosystem.
Yeah, here, and I can briefly jump in on like the double clicking into the non-custodial. So on this one, it's almost binary in terms of like who are the users that you're trying to target and get after. So if it's an average Web3 use case, like we'll use something like a Web3 auth or like a Rainbow Kit SDK, which allows the magic of Web3 wallet composability to like take hold and people can connect what they want to an extent. But then on the other end of that, there's this like the Beam Centauri case that I use as an example, where it's like that's a Web3 experience that is intended to be fully Web2 friendly, like not disruptive to Web2 users. And that's something that I know I think about a lot, especially as more of these big Web2 companies are looking to dip their toes into Web3. So like, for example, also with Beam Suntory, like we've talked about other projects that didn't end up happening, where it was like a bigger ticket NFT auction that might have like represented some exclusive access or like a multi tens of thousands of dollars like bottle of liquor that people were trying to like auction and get. Like that's a use case where even though it's a Web2 company, we just know that would inherently attract more Web3 users. So in that case, we would use a more standard Web3 auth where anyone with a MetaMask with any amount of money in it can get into it. And if there are people who are like not Web3 native, but they're curious about that, like they will probably go through the steps to figure out how to set up a MetaMask wallet.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So that's the wallet section of it. Let's go to Node. There's going to be a very quick one. As Luca mentioned too, not a lot of clients that we work with go with a self-hosted node. And Node is just a copy of the entire chain ledger. So you'll create a computer, and in this computer, you will download gigabytes of data that is all on chain. It's a ledger from ever since the on chain went live to until now, and it will keep getting that information based on the events that it receives. So it's an exact copy of the chain on a computer. And the reason why we do that is to make things speed up. Because right now, if you were to go directly to Ethereum network or Polygon network and try to search something on a smart contract to say what's the most recent transaction you have received, it's going to take approximately maybe 30 seconds to a minute, and on a busy time, it can take 3 minutes. But if you have your own node, dedicated node, that request can come down to 1 to 2 seconds. So that's why we do that, is to make things speed up. And the go-to solution right now, as Luca mentioned as well in his presentation, was Alchemy. Infura is another one, but we don't really use it as much because Alchemy prices are better and their scale better. But of course, I'm pretty sure that will change. Go Ethereum is the alternative, which is self-hosted, where you can run a CLI command on your computer. You can try it out yourself too. And on your computer, if you have enough space to store all that data, it will start a node on the computer, and then it will keep it up to date. And it will also give you API to work with to say, what information do you want about certain NFT contracts versus certain token contracts or DeFi platform, anything like that. So that's Node. Of course, we always go with hosted, and the price range is not too bad. I think there's like $50 for like millions of requests you can make. So it's perfectly fine. Any questions on Node? No, perfect. All right, moving on to next one, chain. We always, of course, need to know which chain we're going to tackle, which one are you going to work with. For the NFT projects, usually it's just one chain. So you would either go with Polygon. Most of the NFT projects go with Polygon because they want to be environmentally friendly. With Ethereum, every time you do some compute, you have to pay a little bit of a carbon footprint price that you have to work with. Whereas in Polygon, something like that will be, I think we did that for 100 Thieves, where we calculated to be one transaction or one NFT claim was equal to 20 emails sent. So it was, of course, like some marketing thing that we came up with, but that was just to say that, yes, NFTs at that time, everybody was saying that they're not very environmentally friendly, but we tackled that by saying we're working with Polygon, who is very environmentally friendly. So that's for NFTs. But for DeFi, you may work with layer one solutions where everything is on Ethereum or Binance chain or Solana, anything like that. So you have to pick a chain.
Two questions here for you. Sorry to interrupt. One, is that actually still like a conversation you have, like sort of like mainnet versus L2 versus Polygon, now that we're like post proof of stake on sustainability? Because I kind of assumed the sustainability issue, at least for Ethereum, had diminished post proof of stake.
Yeah, you're right. So the 100 Thieves project was before that time. So that's why we had to come up with that tagline. Even after that, though, L2 still is preferred because Polygon, of course, no matter, not just Polygon base as well, right? Like the L2 solution that we have on chain, their carbon footprint is much smaller compared to the L1 solutions. And not just that, the transaction fees, the gas fees are fraction of a cent compared to Ethereum. I've seen $300 at some point. Maybe it's $30 now, but they are very high. So if you're going to absorb gas fees for your users and by using a relayer, then we got to work with something that is going to cost a fraction of a cent rather than $30 or $40.
Yeah, I will add in there, like fees is definitely a big one. And I would say in almost every case we're working with a Web3 native client, they will come to us with like what blockchain they want to build on, either if it's because it's something like Coinbase, where it's like obvious now that base is live, or it's something they've already built on, like they've already invested time and effort into it. But then the thing I also get reminded of is, even though like, yes, Ethereum successfully transitioned to proof of stake, like I was at a freaking like bar launch party for that, and it was like a cool time. There's still kind of like the marketing and PR pieces and whatnot. And especially working with like some of these Web2 clients, it's just like what are the stories that they have in their heads about this? And that's honestly one of the challenging parts of doing this as like a client services business, especially when we're advising from like the very foundation, like what blockchain should you be using. It's important to kind of make sure we're working around the stories that these 60-plus-year-old executives like already have in mind. And so, really like knowing our audience in those cases.
Got it. Cool. And then another question from Albert, who runs a Bitcoin ecosystem accelerator. I'm curious if you're hearing any requests from your client base around building on Bitcoin.
Are we talking like ordinals?
That sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah, we haven't heard anything yet, right, Luca?
No, yeah, I haven't heard anything from like the Lazer side. I am intrigued by ordinals and keeping up with it. I know volume is spiking like crazy, especially like this week. I'm sure the time could come, but to be honest, like I think in the current environment, there's just not as much appetite from like smaller like Web3 startups for the kind of services that we offer. And so I'm hoping that come next bull market, like we will get to work more on like the Web3 startup side of things, which is honestly like some of our favorite type of work.
Sweet. Well, maybe you can connect with Albert after this and see,
would love
what's
to.
going on over there. But cool. I'll let you get back to it, talking about L2s.
Perfect. Yeah, so that's about it for chains. It's just we have to make a decision based on either cost or speed. And depending on what kind of project you're working on, for example, in DeFi, you don't have a choice of picking a chain. You have to support all the chains because you got to go from funds coming in from L1, but you're giving back L2 coins. So DeFi is a little different, but for NFT projects, is usually just pick a chain based on cost or speed. Any questions on chain solutions? Perfect. All right. Let's go to, and actually I'm going to skip over analytics. That will be the last piece because sometimes we do skip analytics in some of the projects, and I'll talk about it. But let's go to smart contracts because that's the next one here. And of course, yeah, for smart contracts, one of the key things that you mentioned, Stephen, was templates. And yeah, smart contracts, we never really just create, like I've never really have to write Solidity code from scratch. Usually it's just templates. And we'll talk about it more in DeFi example as well, where if you want to create your DeFi solution, you're not going to start from scratch. You're going to fork somebody else's DeFi's solution, which is all open source. So Uniswap, for example, was forked by SushiSwap, right? So they didn't just start from scratch. They just forked the whole project, changed some things around, changed the branding, and there we go. Now we have another swap DeFi solution out there. And same thing for smart contracts for any NFT. We're not going to build it from scratch. We're going to use something like Third Web that Luca mentioned in his presentation, right? So let me just show you that in Third Web Explorer. And this is in the resources as well for the Figma. And in Third Web, the reason why we use it is because they're a complete solution. They not only have nodes, but they also have wallet solution built in. They have the smart contract in there, and they have a vast variety of chains that they support. So that's why we go to them. And just if there's no contract in here, for example, in the popular section, we have, if you want to do an NFT drop, you can work with this smart contract. Some other solutions like marketplaces, if you want to build your own token. There was another one that was for DAO, smart wallets. So you can create your smart wallets here, which are shared wallets for organizations. Staking. So these are some DeFi smart contracts, and these are all audited by the community. This is not just built by one person. Audited, that means they're secure. You're not going to run into real the problems that people have run into already, and they've solved for it already. So you don't have to worry about those. And then DAO governance, which are also some smart contracts that you can work with. So that's why we like to work with Third Web a little bit.
Yeah, and then another benefit here is like if we're working with a more non-technical client, like Third Web is one of the only like providers where like a client can share a screen and I can walk them through like a no code deployment of like NFT drop, for example. And you know that's a case where like they are holding the wallet and I'm like, I need you to like display this contract in just like a quick way. And so you know this is a great example of kind of the foundation has been set, and while like we have devs at Lazer who like have written smart contracts and have built very like in-depth things along those lines, to be honest, in a lot of cases like it's just not totally worth reinventing what is already there when there's a lot that has been built at this point. And like something that even we do, like if we're faced with a client building something that we haven't totally like run into before, even just doing a cursory search on like what already exists out there around that use case is really helpful, just because like I found the nature of Web3 is just so open source that like there are like small teams all over the world building just very niche specific things that you never know when you'll run into.
Yeah, awesome. Makes a ton of sense that we'd want to reuse code whenever possible, especially if it's been battle tested. Maybe here, so that was a good I think like maybe let's spend more time on Third Web and Open Zeppelin, right? Like and just talk about like how you use it, right? So it looks like there's the ability just to like pull the smart contract, right? Are there like workflows that are particularly useful? Like what kind of relationship do you have with Third Web versus what kind of relationship can you expect like an early stage startup to have with Third Web? I know Third Web has a lot of like large Web2 clients as well. And so like, you know, can you get hands-on support if you're just a minion or a minnow, or like what can you kind of expect?
Yeah, so we work with Third Web on all actually pretty much all the projects that you mentioned in the presentation, right, Luca? The 4 projects. So I think almost all of them. And then yeah, they show up for our meetings and everything. They're very involved. They help us out wherever they need. And if there's no smart contract here, for example, in the DAO section, if there's a smart contract missing and we're coming up with a new use case which hasn't been done before, they will create that smart contract for us. Or if there is a chain that is not supported, they will support that chain for us. So pretty hands-on.
Yeah. And then otherwise for kind of, if you're starting a project off the ground, like I'm pretty certain they have like a Discord and a pretty active community there. And they're definitely one of the companies that are leading the charge with these like tested existing contract templates where there's a good ecosystem of support around it, whether it's from ThirdWeb themselves, which I know they have quite a few staff like dedicated to community. Like that is a very big part of just their thesis of growing as a company, or whether it's from like people in the community themselves. Something else really nice about the ThirdWeb workflow is if you're just kind of getting started, either with like Web3 development or trying to understand what smart contract might be better for a different use case, they have like a pretty nice UI in these contracts for understanding like what are the actual methods in each contract, like what data do they need to perform an action, what values will they return, and more importantly, why. And honestly, for someone like me, where like I come from Web2 dev background, and I was kind of just scrambling to figure out how to build things in Web3 initially, like I found some good like Udemy crash courses, whatever, like here's how to build like a basic contract, basic like wallet, etc. Um, this makes it easy to analyze that. And like you can look at the code too, and obviously that is helpful, but I find like even just the way they organize things here can be helpful for just getting a high level sense of what the contract's functionality is.
Yeah, it looks like super good dynamic documentation. And what about cost? Like if I'm a startup and I'm building something on someone else's code or platform, like how do you think about the cost of using ThirdWeb? And then like maybe let's talk about similar points for OpenZeppelin.
Yeah. So I mean, as far as I know, the contracts themselves on ThirdWeb are totally open source because I don't think they could have a way of like blocking those off. So yeah, I honestly, the way I think about ThirdWeb from like a startup perspective is it's almost like the contracts they put out are their like top of funnel like content, so to speak, to developers building in the ecosystem. And then they've built up this really great stack of infrastructure for different use cases, like Azza mentioned, for things like wallets. Like they literally acquired a competitor to Magic earlier this year called Paper Wallet, which is very similar, like wallet as a service. They have great integrations with like social logins, with e-commerce, Shopify, things that we work quite a lot with. And it's those services that you will pay, like you will actually need to pay for. But in our experience, like they have very competitive rates, even with things like their gasless relayer. Like we're considering ThirdWeb for that. We're considering Biconomy, which is kind of like the more original like player in the space. In ThirdWeb, like they're also at a point like where they are in their inflection curve is like a growing tech company.
Yep.
They're fairly well capitalized and they're willing to invest in growth. And that's something that they're seem like they want to do.
Sweet, super helpful.
Yeah. And then as far as Open Zeppelin, like that's totally open source. Like that code is out there. I know there's like a pretty strong community around Open Zeppelin. I assume also in Discord, where you could get support from other people in the community. But there, I don't imagine there's as much like top-down support or help. Whereas with ThirdWeb, like when we're working with some of these bigger clients, like we have been in positions where we can ask for certain features to be prioritized over others. And that's just, one of the pros that comes with working with a more centralized organization, which also comes with plenty of cons as well that you would bypass with like an Open Zeppelin.
Are there certain coverage areas between those two repositories and any others where like that makes you immediately like it seems like NFT, like Web3 loyalty, like ThirdWeb very strong. Like is there like a coverage area where they're less strong and you default to Open Zeppelin?
I don't think we have had that scenario yet. Every time when we run into that scenario, we will bring it to ThirdWeb first because they have audited community of smart contract people. So they would just build it for us. And then that makes it easier for us to just take that contract and run with it.
Cool. Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, I think to answer the question about like how I think the unknown here is how do they make money? They have API key. So using that API key, they make money off of nodes. So they have their own nodes, they have their own gasless relayer contracts, smart contracts, or wallet solutions. They don't make money off of those. But if you create wallets like smart contract wallets, smart wallets, then yes, they make money off of those as well. So there's some fees here and there, But for smart contracts and for wallet solutioning, there are no fees. It's open source.
Awesome. Sounds like a great launching off point for a Web3 app.
Yeah,
100%.
if it'd be helpful to get like a little bit more technical. I don't know what the appetite is, but we are happy to like walk through some like architecture diagrams of like DeFi smart contracts, or keep it higher level like this as well.
Yeah, that sounds good. Maybe just zoom out and let's see what we have left, and we can kind of pick and choose. Let's definitely touch on analytics before we skip out of the bubble view, because I think that's
analytics can be a quick one here. We used analytics like Dune Analytics, the graph. The graph, which Luca mentioned for Abacus, was more for just transparency, trust, or community building. So on marketing page, they just wanted to show how many liquidity providers do they have, how much APR are they returning. So solution like the graph, you could create subgraphs to get information from chain and then display that on website. So that's what the graph would do. It's not really analytics that you would get from Web 2, like how many users did you get, or where are the users coming from. That information still stays in Web 2. We never bring that to Web 3. This is analytics more for how is your smart contract doing, or any kind of risk that you can maintain or monitoring that you can do. Dune Analytics we did for 100 Thieves, where we were given a limit because 100 Thieves was an open NFT drop and anybody could get it. You would not need a single dime in your wallet, and you wouldn't have to pay even the gas. We are covering the gas. So that means you just have to press a button and a transaction happens. So that was a high risk for us because we can easily be botted at that time. So in the Dune Analytics, we would just have a every minute collection of what's happening on the smart contract, and we would see how many transactions are we doing per minute. And the volume that we were looking for, it was 200 per minute, or 200 per second actually. So anything that passes 200 per second, we would right away put a banner on the website, or pause the smart contract, or tell people give it 10 minutes, cool things down, and then bring it back up. So things like that. Dune Analytics, the graph we have used before, chain analysis as well. So those are the products you can use for analytics.
Yeah, and then in my experience, the way I've used these, like I've worked with like pre-Lazer clients where like the graph is almost this like I don't know, let's say like middle like dev solution where, for example, in this client, like we were working on like a custom built marketplace, and you build subgraphs on the graph protocol if you need to really quickly pull information from the blockchain. Whereas if you're going to do that directly from like Ethereum itself, those queries would take a long time. And it's just not realistic. You know, in the case of you're running something like OpenSea and you need like live, like second by second data, whereas a subgraph lets you make those queries much more efficiently. And that you can then reflect in a UI for users. And then a lot of my experience with Dune Analytics is more as like a dashboarding tool. It's very strong for doing that. And so if you're trying to communicate, like for us, if we're trying to communicate results of a mint, a drop, whatever, to a client, we can put together like a quick Dune Analytics dashboard, and they can see something that they feel is pretty similar to, you know, your run-of-the-mill like Web 2 analytics solutions that they're used to seeing, just like line graphs, bar charts, and things like that.
Have you ever used I'm thinking of like other operational like analytics tools, right? And so there's the two I'd mentioned sort of like offline was Tenderly, right? Is one that I feel like DeFi teams often use to like make sure they're not being drained, like that kind of like analytics. But I'm curious if you use stuff that's kind of like, you know, mission critical risk management, event based.
I don't think we have had that yet on any of the systems because it's mostly NFT. Few DeFi, but like those are handled by the teams that build the product, and we would just do the front end portion of it or the back end portion of it, but not the Web3 component.
Yep.
But for the NFT pieces, you really don't need that kind of solutioning.
Cool.
And doing a quick time check, I don't think we can go over the architecture diagrams because they can be very extensive. What about resources? You want to maybe talk about resources?
Yeah, just go through the resources so people know where they can jump off. We'll share this. Sorry, what is this? A Canva or whatever it is? We'll share it.
This is Figma. Yeah.
Yeah, Figma. There we go.
All right, perfect. So yeah, just two that I wanted to let people know, because already we looked at Third Web, on-chain summer, we talked about it a little bit as well. Two that I wanted to talk about was the scaffold ETH examples and the DeFi map. So the scaffold ETH example is a fork of scaffold ETH, which is a project which puts together the front end, the back end, the Web3 component all in one piece. Is for code. And it's for learning only. That was the purpose of it. And then they created scaffold ETH examples because a lot of people were submitting their version of what they did with the project. So every branch in here is an example. So anything that you can think of for your product, you can write it in here, and I'm pretty sure there's an example for it. For example, somebody made a clone of Aave, or I'm pretty sure there's a Uniswap or Swapper right there, Uniswapper example. So you can look at these, and smart contracts are right in the packages, and all the contracts are in the hard hat. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, right here, contracts, and you can see the contract, and you can read the code for it. So it's a very good resource to go into and learn more about how to create these platforms. And another one was the DeFi map, and I feel like it's a very good. Let me just copy this. Yeah, this was a very good resource. It's a documentation only, but they have links to almost every DeFi platform out there that you can think of. Aave is right there, and I saw Uniswap as well. Uniswap right there. They give you links to their white paper. They give you a link to their GitHub. They give a link to their docs, everything. And all of that is right in one resource. So if you are very interested in DeFi and you want to see the source code, all the contracts are right in this documentation as well. And that's about it, guys. Any questions?
Awesome. I think we've gone through most of the questions that came up during chat. If anyone else has a question they're eager to air, please do so.
If not, we can go into architecture diagram.
Yeah, I think we still have 10 minutes, so let's knock off one or two. I think we've understand the NFT drop pretty well at this point. So it might be fun to scroll down. Yeah, maybe do the I don't know what WooFi is, so I'll leave it to you between WooFi and Abacus.
Yeah, let's do WooFi. This is not a project that we did, but just because I heard that you guys are very interested in DeFi space, so I found this out. And of course, resource link is there as well. So all the blue squares that you're seeing on the screen, all of them are contracts. And this is a swarm of contracts working together to make an autonomous DeFi platform. And all the contracts are in that resource. So if you want to see the code behind each one of these blue cards, you can actually look at that on the GitHub link. And yeah, so basically in this Web3 DeFi space, they basically just put everything in this diagram as the green colors are all users or entities. So there could be a user who's swapping a token in this case, or user who's providing liquidity, or Chainlink Oracle providing information from off-chain to on-chain, or a broker who's brokering the transaction, or Woo token holders, which are people who are going to benefit from every transaction because they are the investors for the DeFi and things like that. So all those entities are working together in this diagram, very, very thorough. And the one example I can go through here is just somebody going through a swap. So a person who's coming in for a swap, they will go through the router contract first. The router contract will decide where to route their request. And then the request goes to the core contract, which is going to pull information from many other contracts. Information like the fee is going to come from the fee manager contract, or the price will come from a guardian contract, they call it. And all that information, once that's collected, they will actually make the swap happen by getting the liquidity provider involved and then getting the lending manager contract to give the swap contract and send it back to the user. Right. So that's just one example. Of course, there's I think there's 6 or 7 different user experiences in this one diagram, but just wanted to showcase that how many contracts can work together, and you don't just have to create one giant monolith contract to make a DeFi happen. It has to be, every contract has a different purpose and they work together.
Yeah, and to be honest, when I was, learning how to do Web3 dev from a Web2 background, like a smart contract, just think of it as a class that you're writing, and a lot of the, every function in a smart contract. It's very similar to like an object-oriented like function or method. And so there's a lot of parallels, and even just the way like Solidity was designed to be written just has a lot in common with like like a Java or object-oriented style programming languages. So if you have that background, you understand that, like learning the syntax and the nuances of building something on a blockchain can be, like that is a little bit daunting, but when you get to actually like writing the code structurally and looking at it, I found it to be very similar and analogous.
Are there obvious trade-offs between like liveness latency and gas expense when you build like monolithic versus like highly modular like smart contract? What's the word?
Yeah.
Constellations.
You're 100% right about the gas price, because when you have multiple smart contracts swapping information, chances are your gas price is going to be much, much higher. But it does bring the security, and DeFi heavily relies on talking between smart contracts. So I don't think you can really get away with that. You would still have to use it. It's just maybe you can optimize for gas later on.
Wait.
Yeah, and then also I know there are some resources out there which would like charts kind of telling you the like exact formulas or simplified formulas of how gas fees are actually calculated, something like Ethereum. And so, for example, like a read will cost you a fraction of what like a write command will. And so that's just something interesting to reference as you're actually considering like what are the base functions that contracts are doing to each other, like which ones of these are actually doing the writing to the chain versus which ones are reading from it or editing, because those all have different calculations as far as what the costs are.
Great. Cool. Well, that was super helpful. Last call on questions from the audience. Otherwise, we'll move to wrap. Great. Well, Luca, Azim, thank you so much for this. This is super helpful. We've recorded it, so we will share it to participants and also in our channels as well as our YouTube channel. And sounds like some folks are excited to get their hands on this Figma, not Canva, as well as potentially on the slides. So we'll send those out as well. Luca has shared his email address if you want to get in touch with him and the folks at Lazer, which I definitely recommend. They're great to work with. And yeah, thanks again so much for the prep and also the time here. This has been great.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
Bye, guys.